Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another Astral interview. With me, I have Sama Morningstar. How are you today, Sama?
Thank you. I'm well. Thank you for having me on the show. And by the way, it's pronounced Sama, like mama with an S.
Oh, lovely. Sama. What does it mean?
Well, I originally it was suggested to me as a name from one of my yoga teachers from Sanskrit. And there's a verse in the Bhagavad Gita that talks about the practice of returning to divine consciousness again and again,
Right.
which eventually leads to a state of calmness. And that state of calmness is called sama.
Sama. That's
So,
right. There's the Samveda, for example.
yeah, and
Course.
samadhi
Samadhi. Yeah,
is
absolutely.
that state as a sustained state of awakening and awareness.
Awakening consciousness, right.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, Sama. How did you get to where you are now in life? Tell me a little bit about your background, where you grew up, how you grew up, and where life led you to be here today.
Well, my mother, I was born, my mother had me at the age of 17. She was a single mom.
Right.
She didn't know about her fertility.
Right.
And when she asked her boyfriend at the time what they would do if she got pregnant, when she started to put two and two together,
Right.
about what they were, engaging in, he told her that would be your problem. And she broke up with him on the spot.
Right.
And she felt totally unsupported, but I was already there.
Right.
So I often talk about this moment as one of the fundamental blueprints of my life. And working with those blueprints is a big part of my work now, because that was so fundamental in my life. Because then she proceeded to learn she was pregnant and hide me because she wanted to carry me to term and give birth. She really wanted to, have me, but she knew that as a 17-year-old in 1970 in a Catholic family in California, at least our family, her mother would very likely have, if she had found out early on in the pregnancy, would have taken her to Mexico for an illegal abortion.
Wow.
And so that blueprint of having to hide for my life was a strong blueprint for me. And the distress of my mother was also a strong blueprint that immediately put me into the caretaker mode. I was the one that was caring for her from the get-go. And I began to transmit the energies of, as we're gestating in our mother's womb, we sort of have a foot in both worlds. We're not fully formed, we're not fully incarnated yet. Our soul is just having
so can you talk a little bit about that gestation period, or the 9 months, or what it represents? Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So I've since, I didn't know any of this. Well, I mean, I knew it in that I was living it and I had my whole soul awareness. I feel like we, as we incarnate more, we forget the awareness of how things are and all that is.
So let me just take you back for a second. Okay. So talk about your life a little bit first, and then we'll get to how you came to the understanding of this.
Right. Gotcha.
So we have a background so we can know where you came from to see how you got here.
Yeah. So my mom had a very stressful pregnancy with me, which, made these different varying blueprints for my life. she was in Southern California. I think she moved to Northern California after breaking up
Right.
with my biological father. Um, and then she, by the time I was 3 years old, she had started to date my adoptive father.
Well, right.
And we eventually moved with him to Texas, which
Mhm.
I often talk about as the source of much of my early childhood trauma. And they were very young, they were in their late teens, early 20s. They were both very traumatized from their childhood, having had no healing around any of that. They had a very volatile relationship. I was torn away from my family support system. My grandmother and my grandmother had a daughter who was just 2.5 years older than me. So I had like an older sister kind of thing, and a grandmother who had been caring for me when my mom was working, that I was torn away from. I missed my aunt
Right.
terribly. And
Right.
here they were, these young teenagers in this very volatile relationship with no family support and all of that. So we eventually came back to Southern California and then moved to San Francisco. So I had a very mobile childhood, um, amidst very volatile parental relationship where they were always trying to overpower each other, very much a
Right.
domination-based relationship. And so uh, by the time I became an adult, I wanted to get out of my family situation as soon as possible, went to college and started studying psychology and women's studies, and
Okay.
started realizing, and especially women in religion and spirituality, because I'd been raised with a Christian background,
Right.
and it never could really answer my questions, like, or at least the people there who I was studying about Christianity with in my childhood and Sunday school were always, like ending the conversation when I would really start asking questions about what was really going on. and
We do have some really testing questions for them.
no, and but that blueprint of me having to take care of my mom,
Yeah,
me having to be the one who, uh, yeah, because she was in this abusive relationship with
I hear you. Yeah.
my father. So that got started right away. And so then it was a natural progression for me to get into some kind of caretaking profession.
Right.
Um, but the psychology that I was studying then, they didn't have anything somatic oriented back in the 90s, in the early 90s.
Right.
There was no somatic psychology back then.
Or if it was scarce and it wasn't in
It,
anyone's vision to see where it
that's right.
was.
It wasn't at UC Davis where I was going
Yeah.
to school. And so I it was very clear to me that I could understand intellectually about all of these patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I couldn't afford to go see a therapist myself.
Right.
And B, I wasn't convinced that any of the approaches that I learned about in as an undergrad studying psychology were going to do me any good.
I hear you. Yeah.
Because it was all very intellectual, and talking about it till your eyes bled wasn't going to change your behavior or how you felt
Right.
inside. But what I did discover was yoga.
Right. Where were you in your life when you discovered yoga?
I was in college, and
Right.
well, actually, that's not true. As a ballet dancer, I had studied ballet as a teenager, and at
Right.
one point, my ballet teacher uh, got one of the students on the ground and put her in a spinal twist. She was the ballet teacher had discovered yoga, and
Right.
she showed one of the ballet students. She showed the whole class, and she put this ballet student in a spinal twist, and the ballet student's back had a nice adjustment, a pop,
Okay.
an audible pop as she
Right.
in the spinal twist. And she said, I just saved you a bunch of money from the chiropractor, right? I'd never heard
Right.
of chiropractors either, right? So I'm
Right.
like,
What
what
are they?
is that? And
Right.
it was not new to me. I mean, as a ballet dancer, I was always on the floor, stretching, moving my body around. And
Got you.
my family was not surprised that I got into yoga, because I'd been doing yoga on the floor already, just naturally, instinctively, to
Right.
get the tension out of my body. And I'd already learned, at 16, I was breathing myself out of getting migraines because I refused to end up in the same kind of migraine cycle that I'd witnessed in my mom and other members of
Right.
the family. And so I somehow had this inspiration, and I would breathe. I breathed the one time I started to get a migraine, I breathed it out the window to the tomato worm in the tomato plant in the garden outside the window. And the next day my mom found,
I feel for that tomato,
I
man.
know, she found this tomato worm completely dead, just like
Oh,
dead in its tracks on the
oh.
branch of the tomato plant the next day. And I told her the story, and she was like, jaw dropped. She was like, okay, yeah. But at 16, and the funny thing is, my mom was reading Autobiography of a Yogi when she was
Oh
pregnant
yeah.
with me.
Paramahansa Yogananda.
Exactly, when she was pregnant with me. That
Right.
book just jumped off the shelf. That was back when you went to the bookstore and actually bought books from a
Yeah, yeah,
bookstore.
yeah.
And sometimes they would jump off the shelf into your hand and you couldn't put them back on. So, well, she had that experience with that book. And so we always say that, I was instructing her which books to read from within the
Right.
womb.
Right.
So in college, then there were a couple of
Interesting. I was in labor with my mom for 3 days.
uh-huh. Took you three days to be born.
Yeah, it took me 3 days to come out.
Yeah. Those birth stories can tell us that there's a big blueprint thing
Right.
here. I mean, for me, my birth story is my mom went into labor. She thought she was having indigestion from some donuts she'd eaten the night before. And she got into the hospital, and she was 17 years old, so the doctors just said, oh, they didn't ask her what she wanted, and her mom was just telling her, just do what the doctors tell you, because that's
Right.
all she'd ever done. And the doctors are giving her an epidural, and it didn't even take effect, and I was already out of there.
Wow. Wow.
And then
Yeah, I obviously didn't want to come out of there.
want to come out. Yeah, so this is a part of these stories, is part of what I've learned to work with later on in my healing. But back to my life story, I mean, I could go on and on about it, but studying psychology, studying yoga, graduating with psychology and women's studies really woke me up to like, oh, no wonder. Yeah, okay, whoa, okay. And then I decided to go to massage school because I could feel the pain in my body.
Right.
Right. That's where it had landed for me. I had back pain, I had digestive distress, and
Right.
you go on and on about the origins of those things. And so I ended up going to massage school, started learning about holistic healing, studied more yoga,
Right.
but first I went to Mexico to study my ancestral roots, and went to a yoga ashram there, and was introduced to Tantra as well. And just started to explore different approaches to healing, because I knew I was not going to I didn't want to have the life that my parents modeled for me.
Right. Right. Of course. Yeah.
And eventually
And it's good that you realize that, or you recognize that, because some people don't even recognize that, right? Some people, they don't see that there's anything wrong with something that's happening in their childhood, where you did.
mhm. Yeah, it was very clear to me that there was a great deal of suffering going on.
Right.
And especially after studying psychology and women's studies, it was very clear to me what the origins of that suffering was. And it was
Right.
very clear to me that I was going to have to get creative in the healing process, because the mainstream approaches to healing were still so
Unknown.
limited. Yeah, just
Yeah.
really underdeveloped and limited.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I started working with body workers. I mostly went to massage school, to pursue some kind of profession that seemed like it was interesting to me, but also
Right.
so that I could then trade with other massage therapists, so I could get some hands-on, help with the pain in my body. And
Right.
and I could feel the effects of yoga and breathing and all of this. So I wanted to further my studies with that. So I eventually um, ended up fast forward quite a bunch of years through, dark nights of the soul and all of this soul searching.
Yeah.
Where am
Yeah.
I going? What am I going to do? And I find myself getting involved in a yoga ashram out in the woods in Humboldt County, Northern California, which I always loved being in the woods and near the redwood trees and all of that. And eventually I was invited to come and help build the ashram.
Right.
And so that's what I did for 11 years, in the from the mid 2000s, uh,
Right.
into the tweens, the 20 tweens.
The
Anyway,
20 tweens.
yeah, there we go. Is that a new term I just coined?
You just did. Yeah.
Saying the 20 tweens. Anyway, and we built this ashram out in the woods, and
Wow, what
I
an accomplishment.
Yeah, well, and I had been living in intentional communities too, because that was another thing I discovered, that the nuclear family model of society with, this cookie cutter houses in these suburban neighborhoods where I had grown up, it just felt like there was no connection.
Confined.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
really, and having to drive hours and hours to see your extended family, and it just
Yeah.
it was really not nurturing to having a social life. And I was sort of averse to intimate social interactions anyway, given my
Right.
upbringing. So I
Yeah.
kind of needed to have it be built in. Like I needed to be surrounded by people in a community that I would just kind of connect with on a happenstance way, and that somebody else was organizing the social gatherings and I had to go there in order to eat my dinner. Right.
Right.
And that was the way, right? Because I wasn't going to go to parties. I wasn't going to do any of that stuff,
Right.
and so I had to have it built in. And I also loved the idea of let's do our lives a different way. This was,
Yeah.
let's explore how we can do this differently so that it works better for everyone, because I just
Right.
saw so much suffering in that model. And then when I was invited, but I'd also seen how hard it was given everybody's um upbringing and dysfunctional family model, that they were
Yeah.
bringing that dysfunction to these
To
communities.
everything, really.
And they weren't able, these young students, even though they'd have this great idea, let's start a community, let's all live together, we couldn't communicate, we couldn't make
Right.
decisions
Right.
together. We tried using nonviolent communication, we tried using
Yeah.
consensus model decision making. It was excruciating. It was just as excruciating as being back in our families' homes.
Right.
And so and
So
so
you realize that it had nothing to do with where you were
or
or
what kind
or
of
how far you had to drive. It had to do with something else.
yeah. And that we all needed this a level of healing, and I wanted to be with people who were engaging in that healing process, and
Right.
no longer with people who were in denial or unaware of the
Right.
healing process that they needed to be in order
Right.
to have a relationships with people that felt okay to me. you know
Right.
I didn't
Right.
just keep perpetuating these same patterns. I could see them happening right before me, and I'm
Right.
like, do you see this? And most people were like, you're crazy, have a beer.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I'm not crazy, this is really what's going on. And so that's what drew me to spiritual communities. So I ended
Right.
up helping to build this ashram out in the woods, and getting together with my now husband there. And
Right.
we were there for 11 years. And that was the other thing, is I had also been in a place where I couldn't, because of that intimacy aversion and because of all the trauma around my parents' relationship, I couldn't sustain an intimate sexual relationship. And I really wanted to have a mate partner, not to have babies, but to have that kind of intimate partnership. And I hadn't been able to do that at all until I started to really dig into this healing process
Right.
at the ashram. So I was there for about 11 years after studying with them from afar for a number of years too.
Right.
But at around 11 years, the leader of that organization, which for me was a relief to have one leader, so we didn't have to have these exhausting, excruciating decision-making processes with the group, right? We just had one leader that we all looked to, and they made the rules, and they were good rules, so we followed them.
Yeah.
However, he had unaddressed wounding that was, as he was getting older, it was coming more and more to the surface, and he kind of got duped by his own authority.
Right. Well, what do you mean by wounding, and what do you mean by authority?
Well, his mother had died when he was 3 years old, and early trauma in that time period, I since learned about, can create a certain personality type, and it's pretty common these days. People are talking about it a lot of times.
Right.
A lot of the time, there's a narcissistic personality type that is very charismatic and can really step into leadership and replaces manipulation for love.
Right. Yeah.
And has all these power dynamics, and that's what they learned to do when they had
Yeah.
that big trauma early on. And
Right.
so he was a master manipulator, and he was always saying to people that he was he was deliberate, he was open about, I'm manipulating you for your benefit.
Right.
And it was true for the most part. But his as he and this had always been the case. I guess it was me getting older too and getting less likely to put up with it. But his trauma patterns, as all of ours do, were perpetuating themselves.
Of course.
And he was able to blame it on his students until they would say, you know what, like I said at a certain point, this
Yeah.
pattern you're pointing out and blaming on me
It's
only
yours.
happens with you. It doesn't
Right.
happen with me with anyone else in my life. It only happens with you. So what does
Right.
that tell me? This
Yeah.
is yours. This is not mine. And it doesn't make sense to me what you're telling me anymore. And that, that's a sign that,
Yeah.
okay, I don't need to undergo this painful manipulation all the time.
Right.
And there was a really unhealthy dynamic going on between him
Right.
and my husband as well.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so but we hadn't gotten married yet.
Right.
And so I told my husband, we need to get out of here. And he listened to me. He believed me. It was a little bit rough for a minute. He tried
Yeah.
to convince me at a couple of points that maybe we needed to stay. And
Right.
no, look what's happening.
Yeah.
Look at what's happening. And so we got out of there.
Yeah.
And the last 6 or 8 years, I mean, we stood to inherit this multi-million-dollar property in Northern California because we were the main people by that time.
Right.
And when we stepped away, he was
Right.
he was taken off of the board of directors. It's owned by a nonprofit corporation organization. Yeah. We're still in touch with 3 years later, that leader died, and this other woman inherited it, and we're still in touch with her, and she may honor the fact that we built
You had that arrangement. Yeah.
that we built it for a lot of years, 11 years.
Yeah.
My husband was the main builder, and
Right.
now she gets to retire there. It's like,
Yeah. Something's wrong with the picture.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but that's another part of the story. But
Yeah.
we've since rebuilt our lives in a different location, and
Yeah.
my husband's found his work. And the truth is, in any teacher-student relationship, in spiritual growth, personal growth, in any therapeutic relationship,
Right.
the person who is learning or receiving the therapeutic guidance from
Mm-hmm.
the professional or spiritual guide or leader, the person receiving that guidance or healing, in order to complete the process, we need to learn to do it on our own without that teacher or guide guiding us anymore, in order for it to be complete. And
well, it starts with the teacher, and then eventually you break away from the teacher because you've gotten to that point where you've recognized it. Not that you don't need the teacher anymore, but that you sort of, the fruit's fallen from the tree kind of thing.
Exactly. And that's the natural part of our growth, right?
Right,
And yet a lot of teachers, especially in that authoritarian model of I'm
right.
the teacher, I'm the master,
Yeah,
they get duped by their own authority.
right.
They get addicted, if you will.
It's ego sense, right?
Exactly. And there's a certain power they feel by being the authority, and
Yeah,
whatever unresolved wounding or trauma that they haven't addressed, perhaps even in their early childhood, that relies on them being in that
right,
authoritarian position with everybody else to feel good
right,
about themselves, makes them addicted to that authority. And this is very common. My
right.
teacher was not alone in this,
Of
and
course, yeah.
it's across.
A true teacher will actually tell you that, I am only here for you, but you got to do this yourself. And, you can exceed who I am if you so desire. It's more about you than it is about me. A true teacher will tell you that.
Yeah. And I've even begun exploring, and I think this is where we are exceeding the teachers that came before us, is starting to explore non-hierarchical models of teaching and learning,
Right,
where we're all teaching and learning each other,
right,
and there's not any kind of authority to any particular teacher. It's just that they have a particular body of work that they're
right,
supposed to create, and that body of work might benefit a number of people. But it's not that they've gotten any farther along on any kind of linear path of growth. It's just that they've been called to create a body of work, and consolidate a body of work that can then provide a structure for others to get involved in, and to have an experience, and to further their own growth. And this is what I'm exploring with my apprentices. I just had a conversation with one of them today, that I learned just as much from them as they might learn from me, and I need their
absolutely.
support just like they need mine. And so it can be a mutually supportive arrangement. And that's more of a I center my healing process now in the womb, because of a number of experiences that I've had. And I can point to the experiences where that we can recognize as womb wounding, that were
Right,
so fundamental, like that experience of my mother not knowing about her fertility and having to hide me. That's a
yeah,
wounding that happened in the womb, but also to my mother's womb, that got passed on to my womb.
right, of
And then
course.
being raised in
So it's not just what happens in your womb, but whatever happens there is passed on to the next generation, unless if you've dealt with it.
exactly. And the thing,
And sorry, go ahead.
okay, uh, um, there's a whole, I could go on and on and on for hours about
No,
this. So
no,
I'd
I
like
hear.
to have a conversation more.
No, I hear. So, what I wanted to ask you was, like, when it comes to the womb and healing the womb, is it true that if you do a healing for that time period when you were in the womb, then you're essentially going to stop the cycle of recreation of the same reality for yourself?
I I would word it a bit differently than that, because when you
Okay,
say that, it gives the sense of that it's a hard stop,
right. But
and
that's
that's not
fairly
my experience.
okay.
My experience is that every time, or it also gives the sense that it's a once and done kind of a thing,
Right,
which it can be that the first time you do it feels like a big wave
right,
of new experience that
right,
you're infusing into your life. and it ripples out and waves into every aspect of your life, back through your ancestry and forward through your descendants.
Right.
This very watery, liquidy wave that just infuses everything with a new blueprint.
Right.
Okay. But that takes a lot of living in between those waves of updating our lives. So
Right.
it's not like suddenly your relationships are miraculously changed
Right.
and that you're no longer running those same
No,
abusive
no, it's
patterns.
you
It's
changed.
you choosing in each moment to recognize that wave of newness, of
Yeah.
a different energy, of a different blueprint, and implementing it in every moment of every day, and making a new choice based on this new information that you have in your DNA. And so your DNA, it takes 7 years for your DNA to build you a new body based on new
Right.
information and new activation,
Right.
and
Right.
so there can be a big burst of it at a certain moment of, wow, I just had this rebirthing ceremony, or I did the month-long rebirthing, or the 6-week long rebirthing program with Sama or someone else. There's plenty of people doing rebirthing things. And then there's an integration of that. And then there can be a need to spiral around again, of like,
Right.
wow, there's this flavor of this pattern that I'm noticing this, and I think I need to revisit that again. And there's another piece of it that didn't quite come to the surface in the previous time, that now, after you've integrated that first layer, can come to the surface. And it's like, people often feel like, wow, did I fail, that I'm having to revisit this? And that's, again, that linear idea about how we learn, when that's really not the case. We learn and grow in waves and cycles, as the womb
Right.
teaches us with the menstrual cycle. Creativity and creation happens. Nature teaches this with the seasons of the year. It happens in waves and cycles. And so we can have a cycle of big growth through a rebirthing experience, and integrate that. And then,
Right.
and then things that we thought we would never learn or feel satisfied about, or whatever, finally we're feeling satisfied. And then things that were hidden underneath all of that say, what about me? My turn
Right.
now, right? And
Right.
pop up
Right.
and
Right. And so new things come to the surface and
that's
they
right.
need to be dealt with.
Yeah.
And so tell me then a little bit about this process. What's involved in it and what's to be expected?
Well, um, I have a number of programs. I have one big all-inclusive program called the Biomystical Womb Apprenticeship. And it is a 13-month long program. And I invite people in the program. And what we do is we start at the decisions our spirit made, and the blessings that our spirit received from our ancestors and whatever spirit guides we had before we were even conceived,
Right.
and the sole purpose that we decided upon, given
Right.
the need that was there, and the lessons our soul was seeking, and all of it.
Seeking.
And we revisit that, because so many people are walking around going, what the hell is the point of all this,
Right.
with all my
Right.
suffering and all the
Right.
things
And then they got told, well, you asked for this, so you got it.
whatever, but actually going and having an experience of all these ancestors that are giving you all these blessings and strengths, and also assignments, and saying,
Right.
this was unresolved for me in my lifetime, and you get to carry the torch forward,
Right.
right? And you gather that all, and it congeals into a soul purpose.
Right.
And there might be assignments from divine allies or spirit allies of, this is your job in the world.
Right.
Or
Right.
there might even be an intrinsic soul purpose, that, like, I have a mission, I know this is my role in the world, and I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna gather all my
You're
uh,
right.
and these are the parents, the exact parents I need to have in order to
Right.
fulfill this, because they're gonna give me the experience I need in preparation for it, right? Then we are then so we attend to that and really take some time to feel that. And
Right.
um, and then we move into the rebirthing phase. So it's in 8 phases, this apprenticeship program. We move into the rebirthing phase where we do what we've been talking about a lot here, where we revisit our conception, our gestation, and our
Right.
birth. And it's not just about focusing on what went wrong or what
Right.
wasn't there for us, right? What was missing. We do become aware of that sometimes, but it's more about bringing our wisdom and strength now as an adult to that developing infant, bringing our divine allies, bringing divine motherly love
Right.
to those moments and
Right.
becoming our own guardian angel, our own spirit ally,
Right.
becoming our own birth doula, and bringing all of our best wisdom that we've gathered and all of our.
So for those who don't know what a doula is, maybe you can speak about that.
Okay, well, a doula is a person who supports a birthing mother and baby through the process of childbirth. So it's
Naturally.
well, in whatever way is right for that mother and that child.
Okay.
And it tends to be associated with naturally because and this is a whole other conversation, we could spend an entire podcast on this. In a tiny little nutshell, um, there are so many modern medical practices around birth that
Right.
that create more need for medical intervention than there actually is,
Right. I hear you.
because the medical model is one of for profit and for a variety of other reasons that, again, we could spend a whole podcast on that. So a birth doula is someone who has non-medical support available and education
Right.
for birthing families, and um, helps them navigate whatever kind of birth they want. There's a lot of people that want to really rely on that medical model because there's this whole feeling that that's going to be the best for them for one reason or another. There's a lot of people who really need that medical model because they have
Right.
certain conditions and things like that. And then there's a lot of people who want to birth as unassisted as possible, and but need that, want that, and need that kind of support because there's not a whole lot of support for that in our society at large. And even in our families, people don't know how to support effectively a birthing mother and child. And so that's what a doula is. And many of us, our parents, didn't have any awareness around that, that might be needed. And there's a lot of emotional stress, physical stress, um, medical stress that can happen, and even trauma that can happen in the birth process. And so going back as informed, loving presence
Right.
through meditation and somatic ceremony, we address those cells in our body that still remember that trauma and give them what was missing, and give
Wow.
ourselves what was missing, and we relive it. We actually
Right.
physically relive the birth process. Some people like hang out on the couch for the first part of it and then slither down onto the floor, make a nest for themselves and slither down onto the floor as though they were going down the birth canal. So they're physically
Right. And
creating.
this happens sort of organically. It's not like you've guided it through to do that, but different
Actually,
people
I do.
act
I actually,
differently.
everybody can create it their own way, but I give people guidelines and resources and guided meditations to help
Right.
them. And
Right.
some people are accustomed to these kinds of practices and create their own, and other
Right.
people who are newer to these kinds of practices will rely more on my guided meditation.
Your guidance for sure.
Yeah. And so then the next phase is remothering. So, our parents, they had what they had to give us and they did the best that they could. And we may, a lot of us are still reeling from what, developmental phases that were disrupted, or,
Hmm.
poor models. Like my the model of relationship that I was witnessing in my parents, and
Yeah.
poor communication models, dysfunctional family, all of that gets ingrained in our system. We get wired, we get programmed by that throughout our childhood. And so spending some time reparenting ourselves, giving ourselves what we needed but our parents couldn't give us, and just reprogramming
I
ourselves
hear you.
to relate in a different way. And then there's coming of age. So our first menstruation is sorely neglected and even abused in our society, that's teaching us to ignore this essential transformation that's happening for us. Um, so coming of age is about that, and also the awakening of our sexuality and how that's treated. And then there's the creative fertility phase, which is all about learning about that in a new way and bringing that our current wisdom to our past self that might not have had that wisdom and might have made certain mistakes or went down blind alleys, or had difficult experiences in the development of our sexuality because that wasn't being supported. And
Hmm.
so reprogramming that development, and then coming into the creative partnership phase, where a lot of us need to reprogram how we engage in intimate relationships and partnerships.
Absolutely. It all comes together and it's all related. And that simple experience that you had in the birthing process can even affect your relationship with your loved one at this time.
Absolutely, and that's exactly. So all of these are interwoven, all of these phases, and then so after creative partnership is the enchantress phase. And this is the phase where it's often associated with the perimenopausal time of the womb. So these are all associated with different womb developmental phases, right? So the
Right.
perimenopausal phase, you've had your children, you've had a go at creating your life's work. Some people have children, some people create a life's work, right? And you realize, is this really my life's work? Whether it was children or some career
Yeah.
choice that you made. And there can often be sort of a midlife crisis at that point where everything
Yeah.
falls apart, and
Been there.
you need to reinvent yourself more
Yeah.
in alignment with your soul purpose. Remember back at the beginning with the
Yeah.
ancestral thing, we were
Yeah.
like, what's the soul purpose? Well, that's when the soul purpose starts to awaken. So it's a developmental
Right.
phase, the soul purpose saying, gotta do it,
Yeah.
now's the time, right?
Right. It's okay that you spent.
No more messing around, no more
Yeah.
preparation.
Right.
Well,
Right.
everything before that was preparation. Yeah,
And it forces you into action.
exactly. And so that is a womb development phase, and that's what
Right.
perimenopause often is.
Right.
And the process of menopause itself,
Right.
of the transformation. And then we move into the wise one phase, where we nurture our development into having our own inner wisdom and being grounded in that, and being guided in every moment towards every step being a step along the path to fulfilling our soul purpose. So we
Right.
just take the whole life cycle of the womb and revisit or prepare for, if we haven't gotten that far yet, right? Depending on where we are in our life, and really give it the attention it deserves, because the rest of the world is like, don't pay attention to that, that doesn't matter. It's like, no,
Right.
it does matter, thank you very much.
Of course it does. Yeah. Yeah. And it's just breaking through the resistance out there in the world when we're trying to articulate the reality to that which resists, and coping with that, and understanding that, and um, being able to bend that reality a little bit, if you know what I mean.
Well, perhaps you're what you mean is about coming into our sovereignty, our sovereign self
Right.
responsibility. It's
Right.
about, recognizing the rules that
That
everybody,
govern this whole thing.
yeah, everybody's sort of agreeing to a set of rules about how to live and how to be in society and how to be together,
Right.
unconsciously. That's just what they are, right?
Right.
And saying, but wait a second, we're evolving living beings and things
Right.
change because people decide this isn't working for me. And so we change and we grow. And so
Right.
being a conscious participant.
So did you have the birth? Did somebody do the birthing um, experience for you? Were you in a birthing process, so you're able to experience it yourself before you started teaching it, or
Yes.
okay?
Yeah,
So do you want to talk a little bit about that experience?
sure. Um, the first time I experienced anything like that was in massage school. And I actually we did a soul purpose meditation where we went back to the moments just before our birth,
Right.
where we became aware of our soul purpose and let that was a huge ripple of, wow, okay, finally it makes a little sense about why I
Right.
had to live all those things that were so painful, because I needed to learn all this in order to fulfill my soul purpose, right?
Right.
And then I've had various versions of that at different times. I've received a lot of aquatic bodywork sessions.
Okay.
So I'd say,
So that's some kind of therapy in water, then, right?
yes, where the therapist is holding you in warm water that's just slightly above body temperature
Right.
and is following the signals from your body and sort of massaging you and swishing you around. And I'm actually a
Right.
certified practitioner in a modality like that called water dance.
Okay.
And I live near a place that's considered the birthplace of another modality called Watsu.
Okay.
And it's a wonderful hot springs here in Northern California. And so that going back, physically going back into an environment like that where you're with another person in
Yeah.
an environment that feels very much like what you were experiencing physically in your mother's
Right.
womb is very powerful. And I've always been a water person, wanting to be in the water and like that. And so my time, I got to live at those hot springs for a period of time and receive a lot of sessions there, and then training again later on to become a practitioner was something that was very important for me to do. And now my intention eventually, when we can get back into this kind of work, because as you can imagine in COVID, we can't wear masks.
Yeah. Exactly.
And
Or
so, especially because I take people underwater, so they're
yeah.
wearing a nose clip, and it's very important that they have unhindered breathing.
Give me 1 sec. Give me 1 sec. I'm just gonna. Hi.
Okay.
Um. So, to understand this better, so you experienced the birthing process. You're familiar with various modalities that even you're certified in, and have certificates in, to do with water and experiencing release through water movement. Is that correct?
And another modality as well, I studied a modality called womb awakening with
Okay.
the authors of the book of that name that's on Amazon right now. You can get the book Womb Awakening. And the whole first, and they do they don't do it anymore, but they did a 9-month apprenticeship program, very similar to my own. It was online. And I actually went to their in-person teacher training certification program as well, the
Right.
last one that they did themselves. And I
So is it 9 months long? So are you reliving your whole?
no. They do the rebirthing it part is 1 month of it,
Right.
but the whole 9-month program, which includes other components, similar to how mine has that first phase, or the second
Yeah.
phase is rebirthing, and then we do these other
Yeah.
phases as well. Their program is similar, and they had other practices that they shared and taught in there that
Right.
some of them come into my work, but not as not. I'm not reproducing their work. I created my own process based on
Right.
a variety of different models.
Right.
Yeah, and so I have all these experiences, and even my early bodywork mentors. After that teacher where I got certified, then I would apprentice with experienced body workers. And I remember the first one I worked with for 2 years, and we would find tension patterns in my body, and we would trace it back to stresses and traumas that happened in my early childhood and possibly in my birth process,
Right.
or even gestationally. So
Right.
I was introduced to this in my body work, and I would often want to do that with my patients, but I had very rare patients that wanted to do that. I remember, I'm sorry, not patients, clients. And I had one experience where one of my clients, where we were kind of hinting at maybe this was something that, because often the position you're born in, there can be a stress to your body, and then you're continually re-injuring that place throughout your life.
Interesting.
And it just gets more and more ingrained. Um, and so tracing it back to that and releasing that initial infant stress from
Right.
that, like that can be very powerful. And he's like dubious about whether what I'm saying makes any sense or not. And suddenly it was at a spa, right? And there's other rooms with other treatments going on, and somebody's
Right.
receiving a facial, and they have a small baby as they're receiving a facial in the next room over, and the baby starts screaming. And, and I'm like, huh. And he's getting all upset with them. Why aren't they taking care of it? Why aren't they kicking those people out?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, yes, okay.
Breathe.
Yeah, this is a sign. I tried to explain to him that this is bringing up something in you.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just that they're not being respectful of the quiet environment of the spa.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah. This is it, right? It's that resistance that I was talking about earlier that you run into as you attempt to share the reality with somebody, because they're so behind this veil of this physical reality that there's too many blockages to even get to them, to even be able to communicate with them, to share with them what the true reality is.
Yeah, for me, I feel like that's when I encounter people like that, it's obvious to me that I'm meant to be a seed planter.
Right.
And that seed might lay dormant in them for who knows what period of time.
Right.
But that it's important that I share what I have to share, but not push on them to be
Right.
ready for that seed to sprout and grow right now. They may not,
Right.
it may be lifetimes before
Right.
you've had the preparation and composted all the things that are the snow has to melt for the seed to sprout, right? And
Right.
their spring might not be here yet. But
Yeah.
it's important that I'm just a little bird that's dropping a little seed on that snow. And when it
Right.
melts, it will.
That's sprout. Right. Such a beautiful analogy. Such a beautiful analogy. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about clients you've worked with now that you've had amazing successes with are, I realize you do group events, you do group teaching. As do you also do one-on-one teaching?
Yes, all of that. And I, at the beginning, when you first asked me about my offerings, I fumbled around for a second because I have a lot of more introductory, smaller programs for
Right.
people who are like, whoa, 13 months, that sounds intense. No way.
Yeah.
Well, but if they're intrigued, but it's too much to start with the 13 months, there's much smaller like hors d'oeuvres or
Right.
even full course meals, but it's just one meal, not a whole
Right.
week worth of meals,
Right.
And
Right.
so I do a lot of introductory things. So one of them is writing from the womb. So
Right.
writing has been an important part of my process from this different voice. So
Right.
that gives voice to, it's a way of writing and approaching writing that gives voice to what hasn't had a voice, right?
Right.
And so those can be found on Eventbrite. And then I also do herbal womb wellness work. I'm a certified vaginal steam facilitator. So the menstrual cycle and our fertility has been so disrupted by all of the disruptions to these womb developmental processes that we discussed, that we go back
Right.
to and revisit. Um, and herbs are powerful allies. And steaming itself is a wonderful ally for helping to, the womb in Chinese medicine, it's often talked about as the womb becomes frozen,
Right.
snowy, icy metaphors, because and not only from the natural way that energy, well, it is because of the natural way that energy flows in the body. Um, the womb tends to be somewhat of a feminine, cold, dark place. And especially in a system that has told us our whole life that it's a place to be ashamed of, it's a place not to talk about, it's a place to hide, it's a place to not let
Hmm.
anyone know that you have any feeling there,
Yeah.
and that all of that creates colder and colder, more and more hidden, damp darkness.
Right.
And so the herbs help to bring circulation back there, so that all of that hidden damp darkness, coldness creates stagnation and
Right.
difficulties with the menstrual cycle, difficulties with our fertility, all of the emotional traumas and
So
difficulties.
what's the other extreme of cold, and I guess heat is the other extreme.
Heat is also a possibility, but it's usually there can be womb heat, excess womb heat, but it's often that there's excess heat, because we can have inflammation in the
Yeah.
womb too.
Yeah.
And but that is often a result of stagnation as well, because if you think
Right.
about the fluids in our body flowing, the blood,
Yeah.
lymph, and all of that, and
Right.
where we've had trauma, like say a physical wound
Yeah.
or strain, or an emotional trauma, we tend to
Yeah.
shut that area down,
Right.
uh,
Right.
instead of letting it continue to flow and heal itself,
Right.
right? And
Right.
so that freezing, I mean, people tell you to put ice on wounds, and sometimes that is helpful because it can be overflowing, right?
Right.
So just getting those fluids flowing again is really important, and that often means releasing the stagnant emotions that we don't want to feel, and so we
Right.
package them up and hide them away, right?
Right.
And but they can become irritants and create heat in there because it's like really irritating, and plus our lifestyle can be very irritating. I was just talking with a woman on my podcast about the IUD and how it is deliberately designed to irritate the inside of the womb so that it won't make a healthy endometrial lining, which produces
Wow.
infertility. That's what IUDs do.
Wow.
And the doctors will actually lie to you about what it does. This woman had been told that by the doctor when she had her IUD at age 19 or 20, or I don't know how old she was, I can't remember exactly, but she's being told that it actually creates a barrier so that the sperm can't get in there. It doesn't create a barrier. That's a complete lie. They
Do
just
you think that's a case of the doctor not knowing what they're talking about, or do you
no,
think
it
that's
was a
blatant
deliberate
cheating?
lie. This was a black woman. This is in the South,
Right,
in the United States. Um,
right,
there's
right,
systemic racism, and it's just another proof of that. So
wow,
the irritation, inflammation can arise and create heat, and therefore a lot of people have hot flashes, especially if there's turbulence in the process, if there's unresolved disruptions to our natural development and our natural flow,
right,
that creates turbulence. Then that by the time we're in perimenopause and menopause, then of course there's all these sources of turbulence and heat because we're trying to go through this natural transformation. And there's all this, no, you're not supposed to get older, you're supposed to stay young, you're never supposed to have wrinkles, you're never supposed to have extra fat on your body, you're supposed to look like a 20-year-old for your entire life, and nobody's going to value you if you get older and wiser. We don't want any wise women out here, right? We want
right,
young, easily exploitable women. That's what we want in our society, right? And
right,
then so we buy into that whole belief system and think
right,
that we're not going to be of value.
right,
And then there's all this turbulence because our whole biology is saying, no, this is the next step of your life, and it's important that you go there. And there's
right,
all these blessings waiting for you there, and that creates friction and heat and irritation
right,
and inflammation.
right,
And so it's not just on the physiological level, but on all levels. And herbs are really wonderful for that because we've evolved with herbs alongside of us
right,
for all of humanity. And
right,
they know how to support us into optimal wellness. And so steaming is a wonderful way. And it has the wisdom of the water, it has the wisdom of the fire, has the wisdom of the herbs, the bringing the wisdom of the earth, and has the wisdom of the air. The steam is coming up through the air, and it brings that, helps to bring more circulation, more warmth.
right,
It also helps the fluids to flow more freely. And the different
right,
herbs have different properties that are known to balance things out in the womb. And so I have a whole herbal womb wellness workbook that
right,
I've created to help people go through a self-assessment program. That's a great introduction to my work because you can learn real practical things you can do at home yourself.
right,
You can assess yourself and see it helps you assess, well, do I need more professional support? What kind of professional support? Because going to your gynecologist isn't going to necessarily get you the kind of support that you need.
right.
Most people.
May want to get other something to supplement whatever you're doing with your gynecologist.
Exactly. So I talk about the role that acupuncturists, Ayurvedic doctors, naturopathic doctors, vaginal steam facilitators,
Right,
even massage therapists, psychotherapists, somatic
right,
therapists, all of these
right,
other practitioners can support you. And so
right,
in that workbook, it talks about, when you need to go see a medical doctor, what they can do for you, when you need to go see these other kinds of practitioners,
right,
and how to know how to navigate that, because a lot of people just aren't even aware that there's any alternative to going to the gynecologist. And
right,
the thing is, modern gynecology, the development of modern gynecology, basically, if you want to, it just disqualifies modern gynecologists for like healthy, optimum health kind of questions. If you look at the history of modern Western gynecology, just do a little
right,
research, look up the founder of modern gynecology, and you'll
right,
see what I mean. He
right.
was a mass murderer. He was murdering women by experimenting on them,
Wow.
and that was the founder. He was murdering enslaved African women
Oh my God.
by experimenting on them surgically. So
So we have that imprint every time somebody.
that's the foundation of modern gynecology. Now,
Right,
Ayurvedic medicine and Chinese medicine, there may be some of that in there, but there's a long standing tradition of enhancing health and including the menstrual cycle in both of those traditions
right,
as an
right,
important vital sign. The other thing that modern medicine has strike against it in my book of holistic healing and who to talk to when you're, having a
Right.
womb ailment, is that women were excluded from medical research until the 1990s.
Yes, I
So
know that.
every medical procedure that was developed before then was developed on male humans and animals. And
Yeah.
then, of course, then go ahead and dole it out to female
Yeah.
women anyway, even though they deliberately excluded women because our menstrual cycle makes it a different animal.
Right.
And you have to pay attention to the menstrual cycle, and nobody wanted to pay attention to the menstrual cycle.
Right. Right. And just by including that one extra aspect, a holistic healing occurs versus a partial one.
Yeah. I mean, when you go to the medical doctor, uh, they'll ask you, when was your last period?
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
When you go to a Chinese medicine doctor, they say, when was your last period? How many days did you bleed? How much did you bleed? What color was your blood? What other
Yeah.
symptoms did you have? And
Right.
they use all of that information as part of your overall diagnosis.
Right.
In fact, it's a central part of your diagnosis.
Right.
All of those symptoms tell us a huge amount. So that's what that you can learn about in this book, the
Right.
wellness, the herbal womb wellness workbook. And then there's all these herbs that vary.
Is that a book that's readily available?
It's about to be published. I'm just finishing up the last refinements.
Yeah.
And you can pre-order it. I'll share a link with you that you can.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll need
And
that.
you can let me know that you want to order it, and I'll let everyone know that it has expressed interest. Um, some people have even prepaid, so if you want to do that, you can let me know that as well. Um,
Right.
but you can pre-order it, and
Right.
as soon as I get these last few little, this is my first time self-publishing
Right.
a book and doing all the editing myself, so there's a learning curve to it. It's not just like
Right.
make your
Yeah.
PDF and upload it. You've got to make sure all the images, because this has a lot of images in it, so
Right.
visually color photos of the herbs and lots.
Right.
I wanted to make it beautiful, and so there's been that, making sure they all have the right number of pixel, it's been quite a
Right.
curve. So I'm getting some help with it, but it's taking a minute. So
I hear you. I hear you. I feel the same way about anything I need to complete in writing too.
yeah.
It's a process, and
I mean,
and
I'm great at writing the book. I'm great
yeah.
at writing, but then the editing process, I got help with
Yeah.
the proofreading, thank
Yeah.
goodness. And one of my
I've edited for people before. I seem to be good at that part. I'm just not good at doing it for my own stuff.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty proud of myself because I seem to have overcome that hurdle. I spent quite a bit of time editing and going over
Good.
the book. I tend to like want it to be done. Like I write it, it's
Yeah.
out, I'm done with it. That's how I
Yeah.
feel about poetry,
Right.
But I
Yeah,
was
it's
like,
a
no,
good idea. It's a good idea to edit the piece that you wrote in the moment before you go to your next writing piece.
yeah, not move on. Although this herbal womb wellness workbook is kind of a baby that a bigger book that I'm writing had.
Yeah.
So you can have these good ideas and then things happen differently.
Right. Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing all that you've shared. Thank you for the resources you've shared. Thank you for the information you've shared. There's quite a bit of insights here in this small dialogue we've had. We have to do this again because I'm sure, I mean, we can spend hours and hours digging deeper into each phase that you discussed, um, from birth to wisdom.
And I've done so already, actually. We don't need to do that. I've got
Okay.
webinars introducing a number of the phases.
Oh, wonderful. So we will be able to share that on the website as well then. That would be lovely.
Yeah, it's all on the sign up page
Okay.
for the apprenticeship program, so we can share links to that.
Amazing.
And if we want to put the actual webinar videos themselves
Yeah.
on the page there, we can do that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we can just have links going to you because they're going to find them there anyways, right?
Right.
Yeah. 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 It'll be perfect. Okay, so I've exhausted my questions. Do you have any questions for me?
I think I'm good right now.
Do you have anything you want to share that I may have forgotten to ask you or not known to ask you?
Um, no, I think we've covered pretty much everything.
Well, I look forward to going deeper into this with you. Um,
Mhm.
and we'd love to have you back sometime.
Okay,
Uh,
sounds like a plan.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Sama. There, I got it right.
There we go.